In this part, Fairley starts pulling Zionism into the mix. Let's do some rapid-fire fact-checking. This is true. It was a major interest of his. The part about this meeting is correct, except that the reason for the protest is not correctly put. It was raised because the Orthodox Jews believed that Jews would one day be restored to Palestine, while liberal Jews thought that the idea behind the meeting was obsolete nonsense. It was perceived to contradict the messianic destiny of Judaism and the perceived mission of Jews to support their own native lands. The quote from Herzl is false as it stands. Here's the actual quote from Herzl's diary. As you can see, the intention is not what Fairley describes. This quote comes from an obscure 1928 book by David Druck, which is a biography of Rothschild, and does appear to be at least partly genuine. The first sentence may not be. I can't access the whole book, but it does go on to say the following. The speech where Nordau said this was allegedly a meeting in Lyons a month after the Congress. I don't think there's enough evidence that it was genuine. But given the world situation at the time, it would have required no prescience or conspiracy to predict a world war ahead. The 7 Years' War of the 1700s was certainly an anticipation of it. I can find no proof of this quote in any reliable source. Someone put it in Wikipedia referring to Herrick's The Panic of 1907 and some of its lessons, but a search of that document finds no such quote. This is already suspicious because different dates are given for this quote by various sources. Some say 1911 and some say 1913. It does seem to reflect sentiment by Lindbergh found in the congressional record. But all that Lindbergh offers in the congressional record is a lot of conspiracy theorizing. It amounts to Fairley quoting himself as an authority. This isn't quite right. Here's the real quote from Wilson. Wilson also issued more warnings of that type, but he did so in 1911 as a candidate, not later on as president. The quote Fairley uses is from June 1911. A quote from later that year sounds a little like the last sentence, but posed as a question. I don't know what Fairley means by it has never had to publish any accounts. What sort of accounts? At present, there are certain audits in place. Well, of course it was addressed to him because it was a personal letter to Rothschild. As for what it said, you can judge for yourself from these contents. As you can see, it doesn't exactly specify a state, it just says a home. But what's Fairley's point here? Does he think this has some connection to all this banking stuff he's been talking about? He doesn't say, but the Declaration had nothing to do with banking. Rothschild was a prominent leader in Zionism, so its being addressed to him is not a mystery. As for purposes, I'll let some points from an expert writing for the Jewish Quarterly address that. Closest this comes to what Fairley is looking for is where it refers to a powerful influence by Jews, which is also considered an erroneous expression of what is actually a tame form of anti-Semitism. Fairley has fallen into the same trap. We should also add what it says about the Declaration intending a state. Not one credible history on the Versailles Conference says anything about this. One of them does say that Rothschild, among others, helped draft a presentation to give at the conference. That presentation was put off for a few weeks while the participants attended to more pressing matters, and the leader, Chaim Weizmann, was meeting with anyone who would meet. They finally got to make the presentation on February 27, 1919, but in the end, after mixed reaction, the issue of a Jewish state was set aside. So Rothschild was not the host, and the land was not handed over to anyone, much less the Rothschilds. Actually, that should be A.K. Chesterton, who was another conspiracy theorist. So again, this is like Fairley quoting himself as an authority. It's supposed to appear in his book The New Unhappy Lords. That said, it could be accurately said to reflect Chesterton's views in general. This is often cited as being in a Time magazine article. The good news is, it's really in there. The bad news is, it doesn't give a source. But there are reliable quotes from Marx and Engels that posit communism as a world revolution, such as this one, so the sentiment would not be foreign to Lenin. But that sentiment does concern communism, not something bigger. At this point, Fairley offers an extensive quote from Albert Pike about the destruction of Christianity. We won't reprint it because Pike was not an expert in history or religion. He was an attorney and was not qualified to address this subject matter. So even if he did make the extended quote Fairley offers, it hardly merits attention. That said, the extended quote is usually attributed to a letter Pike wrote to Giuseppe Mazzini in 1871. I traced it as far back as a 1957 book titled The Red Fog Over America by William Carr, which is not close enough to Pike's lifetime to be a reliable source, especially since Carr was a conspiracy theorist and not a scholar. Where would he get access to Pike's personal letters? I'll give this vid half a tank.